Hello, very nice to be here, and thank you for your excellent presentation on Vienna. And I'll try to continue with similar lessons now, maybe from a slightly different perspective, because I'm not a designing architect, but I work within the administration, so just to sort of add on. And I was asked to give a sort of very practical approach to housing policy. So I'll attempt to show you our framework in Helsinki, then show you just how it is done in practice in the city, and then in the end show you a bit of the vulnerabilities and strengths and maybe weaknesses of the system. My background is also in architecture. I am an architect. I've done a lot of housing design, but the last few years, maybe because I had a mission, as was discussed earlier, I have been working first within city planning and now for the last 3 years in Helsinki housing production, which is a city-owned developer. That's something really special for Helsinki. And so my presentation today is a bit, it has sort of two sides. I see it from within through my daily work, but I'm also a researcher at the Aalto University doing my dissertation in housing, so I also try to look at it from the outside. Helsinki, I've been working and living there for most of my adult life. I'm not very far from this spot, and this clearly shows the strengths of the city. It's it's urban, it's a city, but it's still quite small and livable. We love those monocle quality of life surveys where we're really safe and livable. Maybe not as livable as Vienna, but we're getting there. And we're also a quickly growing city. We have now 674,000 inhabitants, and the forecast is that it will grow by 8,000, 10,000 people yearly. And this has been the pace now for many years. And the population increase comes mostly from elsewhere in Finland, and also a lot of international immigration, which is changing the city in many ways. We have around 400,000 dwellings. They're mostly in apartment buildings, which is not typical for Finland, but quite typical for Helsinki. Sort of long urban tradition, and 42% of the dwellings are owner-occupied. So we also have quite a lot of rental apartments, and then we have other types of housing, to which I'll come a bit later. Something special for Helsinki is that not as much as in Vienna, but we have 14% of the inhabitants living in city-owned rental apartments, so-called council housing. But it's quite a lot, and that has a big impact on our policies as well. And 20% of all housing stock is built, like over the years, for many decades, has been built by Helsinki Housing Production, so the city-owned developer where I work. And this year, because of all other construction being at a record low, it's going to be more than 30% of all housing is built by us. We have had record years of housing construction in the late 2010s. The city has been growing really fast, but as you can already see, in 2022 it started slowing down, and in 2023, 2024 it has been awful in many ways. There's actually not a lot of building going on at the moment. We'll hope it will get better in the next few years. But still, the planned housing production for the next few years is immense, and as you can see, it's all over the city. Oh well, the basics of our housing policy, now that you know a bit about Helsinki. We also have a long tradition of active housing policy, and it started after the war in the 40s and 50s, just to combat housing shortage, which was acute then. And then the state created Arava, which is a state subsidy program for housing construction, which actually made it possible to build large-scale housing. In the 50s and 60s, there were the first problem neighborhoods in the city, so the city realized that housing policy has also something to do with the social aspects. And then in the 70s, as people were moving out into the suburbs and in the neighboring cities, they realized that housing also has to be affordable and it has to be attractive to keep people in the city and not move outside of the city. So that was when the sort of four things that are important were combined over the years: housing shortage, building enough housing, preventing segregation, making it affordable, and making it attractive. That's sort of the four main things. Then in the 90s and 2000s, there have been slight changes to the policy, different types of tenure, and starting from the 2000s, maybe the most important thing has been the mixed tenure structure. That has been sort of the goal of the housing policy. This is one of the first social housing projects in the city. It's called Snake House in Käpylä, which is one of the sort of most important architectural pieces of housing in the city, and it's still used as city rental apartments, and it was just refurbished by the city. Of course, the sort of city policy is based on national housing policy. So we have ARA, which is a sort of national building fund, which gives out interest subsidy loans, a bit like just was mentioned in Vienna. So all of the sort of social housing is based on these interest subsidy loans. And then in addition to that, it gives investment subsidies for groups with special needs. So if you build for the elderly, you get investment subsidies in addition to that. Then there are the MAL agreements, which are agreements between the municipalities and the state on certain quotas of housing that are built against then infrastructure investments, for example. And these are done also to prevent segregation and to produce growth in the cities. And then, of course, on a national level, there is the direct support for individual households. There's the housing allowance for families to pay for housing. That's sort of the final step of supporting people. And the city strategy is called AM-ohjelma, or Housing Policy Implementation Plan program, and it's renewed every 4 years. It has been done for decades now, and it's done between the elections, so as to prevent that it changes like radically. So just now we have elections next year. So this in August now the city council approved the new strategy for housing, and it includes 38 measures divided into 4 themes of social sustainability, high quality attractive housing, suburban regeneration, and then sufficient housing production. I'm not going to go through all the 38 measures. It's unfortunately only in Finnish if you're interested, but you can find it on the internet. But the sort of most important objectives of the program now are that Helsinki wants to build 7,000 housing units annually. And of course, as the city doesn't build them themselves, they have to provide for 400,000 square meters of new detail plans every year and new housing plots every year to facilitate the building of 7,000 housing units. It's clear that it's not going to happen like next year because of the building markets at the moment, but that's the plan on the long term. And of course, 1,500 units are built by a city-owned production, so that's us then providing these. 55% of new construction is as urban infill, so not on greenfields, but within the city structure. Then there are urban regeneration funds for certain neighborhoods that are sort of troubled neighborhoods, and they provide new housing and services. Then the city builds homes for vulnerable groups and senior citizens, and there's a program to decrease homelessness. And then special emphasis on family apartments. I'll come back to that later. And then there is a program within the program called Rethinking Urban Housing, which gives out a small share of plots each year according to quality criteria, like housing quality or ecological quality. But these are like maybe 2 or 3 plots each year. But the most important policy is the Helsinki mix, which I already hinted at, which is the sort of control of tenure types of ownership and financing in every year. And it works on a city level and on a neighborhood level, and it's applied on all land, city-owned or privately owned. So if you have a large area where you want to build, 50% of it can be non-regulated owner-occupied housing. 25% has to be subsidized rental housing, like student housing or social housing. And then 10% are intermediate housing types, and 15% are non-regulated rental housing. This is the new program. It shifts every 4 years. This is the one that was decided in August. And what do these intermediate types mean? This is an example of in Kruunuvuoren Ranta. These were built by the housing production. First of all, the red building over there in the back, that's a state-subsidized rental housing project. And that's the most affordable type that we have. And there are criteria for tenant selection according to need and income. And then there are right of occupancy housing projects, which means that it's not rental and you don't own it, but you pay 15% of the purchase price, and then it gives you right of tenancy in the flat, and when you move out, you get the 15% back. So it's a sort of safer form of rental living. And then there is a third type, which is Hitas, special for Helsinki. It's a price and quality controlled owner-occupied housing. So it's like normal owner-occupied housing. You own the shares to the apartment, which is typical for Finland. But the price is set at a certain limit, and also the resale price is controlled. So you get an affordable flat, but you can't make a lot of money with it, like reselling it. So that's sort of the policy that we have, and now I'll show you a bit how that works in practice within the city. And it was good that land was already mentioned this morning, because a really key to this policy is that the city owns 64% of its land. And if I have like one thing that you should do as a city, you should buy a lot of land, and you should have done it like 30 years ago. That would be the best solution to have an effective policy. But in addition to that, the sort of housing policy is a lot of work. We are involved in programming the housing, in planning, in designing an actual building. That's what I do. And then controlling the building permits, and then actually owning and maintaining the housing. So at all stages, we're sort of hands-on involved. And then the most important thing, the mix is applied at a really early level. When the first city plans are made, then the land is allocated to different tenure types. And some plots are reserved for social housing, and some are reserved for the city's own production, which were the 3 examples that I showed you in the photo. So this is an example from Jätkäsaari, which is a newish area quite close to the city center. So the blue ones or the green ones are like for market, the unregulated, owner-occupied and rental plots. And then the blue ones are intermediate, and the purple ones are state-subsidized plots. So you get student housing, housing for the disabled, rental homes for musicians, stuff like that, mixed within the neighborhood. And this is a few years old, but this shows the sort of price range then that exists within the neighborhood, that the city-owned rental housing has a rent of 14 euros per square meter, and a few blocks further, the unregulated rental housing is 10 euros more per square meter. And then the Hitas apartments are sold for 5,000, and then the unregulated are sold for 9,400. So that shows you sort of the price range that exists within the neighborhood. I'll show you some pictures of this block here. This was built by ATT as well. It has 192 apartments. It's just this sort of quite dense urban block. And within the block, there are these 3 types of housing. They share the same yard, they share the same parking. They are the council housing, and the owned housing are just like they meet on the yard every day. So they're mixed on this level as well, and you can't see from the outside which is which. From the inside, there are some like small differences. There are materials, maybe size, but the differences are not that big, really. This is the plan, which shows you some of the sort of qualities that we were able to maintain within the quite sort of dense structure, that there are like apartments opening to 2 sides. And these sort of quality aspects are a part of it, and the sort of policy that council housing shouldn't look like council housing. It has to be like the same quality, the same sort of basic quality has to apply for everyone. And then a minimum of 50% of new housing has to be family apartments, which means that it has to have 2 or more bedrooms. And there needs to be a diversity of apartment typologies within. You can't build only studios. And there is this group, a local evaluation group for project quality. It's a bit like the Baumeister that was maybe, I think it's a bit like that, a bit on a sort of more basic level, that every project has to come before the group for evaluation before building permits, and they evaluate the quality. And then a new thing within the policy is now that there will be maybe new guidelines for daylight, usability, and furnishability to evaluate those projects. This is the Hitas apartment from the block that I just showed you. This is it's sort of very basic. It doesn't look as nice as in Vienna, but this is the council housing sauna. all have shared and communal spaces, club rooms, and laundry facilities. It sort of comes from the plan. Well, affordability then. The policy is built in a way that the key to affordability is building enough. Like if you build a lot, then you prevent prices from rising. I don't know if that works perfectly, but that's sort of the thinking behind it. But that requires a constant flow of new land, available land that's ready to build, and detailed plans. And that's where it hasn't been working well enough, but it has maybe prevented the prices from rising as much as they could have. And then there are other preconditions for building affordable social housing, which was already mentioned today, like having discounts for the land costs. Like it has to be, that's crucial, that the land can't be as expensive, and it can't have like additional building costs, like very complex plots that need piling and expensive groundwork, that you have already sort of spent the money before you get to build. So that would be to build affordably for social housing, you would need to get the easy plots, which is not working, although we get discounts for the land fees. And then this is not a perfect solution for affordability. diversity doesn't provide affordability as such, but it provides the fact that you can, like anywhere in the city, you can find some affordable apartments, that even quite close to the center, there are affordable housing, maybe not as much as needed, but there are more options than would be without the tenure type mix that we have. Well, now to finish, this all sounds very perfect and it's working really fine, but that's not the whole truth. Although, like compared maybe to other big cities, we don't have that many problems with segregation, and we don't have problem areas, and the prices have been sort of not rising 200 or 300% like here. But we do have problems, and one big problem is that this is sort of a policy that is built on sort of relying on institutions and relying on sort of stability of policy that has been there over the decades. And now, just 2 years ago, the HITAS program was discontinued by the city because it was thought to support like mostly middle-class people who don't actually need support. So the politicians thought that they would replace it with more right of occupancy housing. But then what happened was that we got a new government, right-leaning government, who decided that they don't want to give out state subsidies to right of occupancy housing anymore. So that will stop next year. So we don't have HITAS apartments anymore. We don't have the right of occupancy housing anymore. And next year, then they will also cut state funding significantly, so there will be less subsidized housing, and at the moment there's no unregulated housing production. So out of the 4 pillars that we have at the moment like 1.5. So it's not working perfectly, and we're sort of in the middle of a storm trying to figure out what to do, because it was disbanded like within 2 years, something that we had built up for 70 years. That's how it seems to me at the moment. So we're trying really, really hard for new solutions. There are some new tenure types that we're testing, like between renting and ownership. We are starting a pilot, but it will take a long time before that will start to work on a bigger scale. And of course, there has to be more focus on urban infill and refurbishment and reuse, just as mentioned today, because we can't just go on building and thinking that's the solution. And maybe most of all, the cities have to take active role in housing policy, because the state doesn't want to do it, obviously. that has become very clear. So the cities have to decide themselves what they want to do in terms of housing and build it up for themselves, so they're not dependent on the state. Just to finish now, why does housing policy matter? These were already in the good presentations today mentioned. It has provided a balanced long-term development, and who takes responsibility for the big picture? It's not going to be the markets. It's sort of the cities and the state have to do it. And also in terms of like facing the ecological crisis, building the wrong kind of housing is really a poor way to use the limited resources that we have. And I'm talking about money, but also about like ecological resources. And lastly, housing equity, social and ecological sustainability are very critical for well-being in the city. So if we don't have that, we don't have really a reason to live in our cities. So this is one of our co-housing projects there, where they bring all the flowers for the winter in these glass verandas. And this book here is something that we published last year. It's a production of the last 11 years of our social housing. If you're interested, then the link provides it, and I also have some paper copies if someone wants something like that. And with that, I'll end. Thank you.
Could you send a copy to Tallinn city government?
Yes, I can do that.
We do have a few questions here as well. Let me find the correct spot. Where were they? Yeah. What is the administrative and maintenance cost of public housing for the municipality society? Obviously, the politicians had a reason to cut it, right? So what's the cost?
You mean for the city now, or
for the city? Yeah.
Well, for example, the HITAS program was discontinued because politicians thought that they could get more money out of land fees if they would sell them to the highest bidder instead of giving them out to affordable housing. So
we've done that in Tallinn.
Yeah. I don't know the exact costs, but this is something that's being calculated all the time. Yeah.
But do you know the cost of the system to maintain?
No, I don't. It's gonna be. It's a lot, but it's divided into different administrations, so I don't have that. But for example, our housing developer is we have our own budget, so we don't actually use taxpayer money, but we get a small fees from developing, and that's how we fund our. So actually, that's not being paid with the taxpayers' money. So. We try to make a zero profit out of that.
How does the public housing affect private development and the real estate market? I know you had a slide, but I couldn't capture all the details there. So perhaps you can.
That's a discussion that the different tenure types are disturbing the markets in a way. And I would see that as a good thing as well, because if we have the same kind of housing that costs 5,000 euros or 9,000 euros, then you think about it. Which one do I buy now? Which one is better? I don't know. But that's, of course, something that is contested all the time. And that's maybe also one of the reasons why this isn't universally approved.
The developers don't really like it.
No, of course not.
What is Helsinki doing to prevent demolition and incentivize reuse or a remodeling of existing buildings into houses when we talk about the green transition and the footprint of building?
Not enough at the moment because of the huge growth. There's a large pressure to demolish low density housing and replace it with high density housing, and that's something that's a continuing discussion. But of course, we do own the city rental apartments, and these are being refurbished at a certain rate, all the time. That's something that we do.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that there are discounts for land costs in social housing. What are the discounts exactly?
There is I don't know how many percent that is. I could check that. I don't know, but you get. If it's ARA financed building, so if it's state subsidized, then the land fee, because the city doesn't sell land, but you rent it for 70 years, and the fee is then slightly smaller for state subsidized building.
And one last thing, in some cities, tenured-based entrances or so-called poor doors are considered perpetuating social stigmas. Has there been an issue or a discussion on that in Helsinki too?
You mean that there's a stigma in social housing?
Yes. Well, there's very much a stigma here in Tallinn about that.
Not really, because it's quite common, and there are these different types. So yes, a little bit, but it's not you don't have to be ashamed to say that you live in a Heka apartment.
Mm. Thank you so much. Are there any more questions from the audience that should still be asked? Yeah, there's a microphone heading your way, hopefully really soon.
Hey, your case kind of shows that it's very important to have different programs. It's not to concentrate on one single way of doing things, but really having different programs. Or do you disagree? Do you think that there is one mechanism that fits all?
No, I agree with you. I think that the diversity of approaches is important, and that was we sort of saw that that we actually, although we thought we had different approaches, we didn't have enough, because like 2 or 3 decisions by the government almost like make the thing collapse in a very short time, and that's what we're experiencing now. So being sort of surviving different situations and scenarios, you have to have like different approaches and different mechanisms. Very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Excellent.